All right, good afternoon, everyone. We are into the final afternoon sessions of talks for today. I think I did a quite poor job earlier of explaining what Figshare Elements actually are, for those of you in the room that don't know what they are, because you have one or the other or neither. So I'm just going to briefly say, Elements you've heard a lot about today so far as a research information management system, but Figshare is a repository platform. So let's just at least start there. Figshare is a way to make your outputs available and share them. So yeah, a lot of you will be familiar with repositories, and Figshare is a hosted repository. I also had a very good question, so I've snuck this in during the lunch break. Of what is open access. So the talk today, we're going to be talking about using elements in Figshare to support open access workflows. But I thought I should start with what is open access. So I started working in this space in open access. I worked for a couple of different gold open access publishers. I started doing that mainly because I went to a university that did not have the budget to subscribe to all the big journals. So I did an undergrad in biology, needed to be able to cite and read a lot of literature, was quite frustrated by that, so I went into actually supporting peer review, open peer review, truly open peer review, for a quite progressive open access publisher. And I've ended up at Digital Science kind of off the back of that. It's in the same kind of vein and space. But open access, by this definition, is a movement that seeks to grant free and open online access to academic information, such as publications and data, which is interesting, and we'll get onto that in a bit. Used to be just publications when I started. A publication is defined open access when there are no financial, legal, or technical barriers to accessing it. That is to say, when anyone can read, download, copy, distribute, print, search for, and search within the information. And also, I can read that because I found my glasses, which is very good. So I'm going to whiz through some examples of how policy is driving the uptake of open access. This is an Australian funder who has an open access policy. We've got the policy highlighted here. All peer-reviewed publications that are supported in whole or in part by NHMRC. There's lots of acronyms of funders, and they all start with N. Made immediately open access and published also here with a Creative Commons license, which allows reuse of that content. We've got another policy also in Australia from the ARC, which is about all funded research must be made openly accessible within a 12-month period from publication date, and must also include funding acknowledgements of the ARC and the project ID. That one didn't have a red box. We've got the New Zealand MBIE open access policy, open research policy, and it outlines pathways to open access, including green open access. And we'll talk about gold and green in a minute. The UK has had, through its last government kind of research assessment framework cycle, and a mandate, a policy that to be eligible to receive funding from the government, the universities must help their researchers in complying with fairly short-term compliance rates. So within a few months from publication, there must be at least an author green open access copy available. And the one that you will all be aware of, and I had, again, good chats at lunch about, is coming, sort of coming, might come, not quite sure exactly what framework this is going to definitely be released in yet, because this is being stuck with some challenges getting through, all the way through to being made into law, as far as I understand. But the OSTP memo is the first real any kind of indicated effort that the US has had to follow in the footsteps of the EU, of the UK, of Australia, of other funders who are looking to make sure that we are making publicly funded research publicly available. And this is focusing on open access to publications. And we've also obviously I haven't got a slide for it, I'm not quite sure why, but the NIH has got a mandate that is in play already for open data, and making sure that that is available too. So basically the take home is it's happening at different rates in different places. It's quite a new ask of some researchers if they've not been trained in doing this before. But if we assume that they have to do it, let's take the pretense that they will be having to make their research openly available, both publications and data. That is my pretense for the session this afternoon. So, assuming they have to do it, what are the challenges? Well, researchers don't want to have to rekey metadata. They've already spent time filling that out for the publisher when they've submitted that. They want to be able to make content findable. If they have to put it on a repository or put it somewhere else as well as the publisher, they want to make sure it's actually going to get them some views and downloads and citations. As we saw from Andrew's talk earlier, they're really keen to make sure that any work they have to do on top of their normal responsibilities is actually going to get them some credit. Where can researchers actually share that open access PDF? The challenge of, okay, I've been told I have to do it, but where can I actually put my article now? My author kind of copy rather than the publisher copy. And actually, do I even definitely have permission to share it? Because even though my funders told me I have to, depending on the journal I've chosen to submit to, I might not be able to share my article either straight away, ever, or within a defined period of time. There might be an embargo from the publisher on when I can share it. So lots of questions that come with having to share content open access. So how does Elements help? If we go line by line, obviously we have harvesting. So they don't have to rekey metadata. We will try our best to both find publications for them from the data sources that are available. And then ideally, once they've verified that a few times, we'll also just automatically show them articles that is theirs. Making content findable, the metadata that we do pull down, because we pull directly from publishers, it's richer. It's better quality than if they had to key it in themselves often. As I said, they don't want to be admin people for a living, so if we can give them more complete metadata, that will help with indexing in Google Scholar, and those questions we had earlier about how do we get those rankings on Google higher. Where can they share them? Well, ideally a repository, ideally your institutional repository, but again, that would be another system that they're going to have to also rekey a metadata to. So we need to make sure that repository plays well with Elements, and we have an integration that we'll talk about that allows us to do that. And that whole do I have permission to share my article thing, well, Elements will allow researchers to see institutional advice on this, or also even query the Sherpa Romeo database at the point of deposit. And I've got some very tiny screenshots, but this is showing the Sherpa Romeo integration in action, basically. So you can type in the journal you want to submit to, and it will tell you whether or not you're allowed to submit a copy and under the licensing restrictions and those sorts of things. So they can do all of the deposit workflow in one system. How does Figshare help with this? So as I mentioned earlier, we are a repository platform, and we do plug into Elements. So if you are making use of that, once you've done that, I pulled this today from CMU's Figshare. So this is a journal article. It's an older one, but there's been updated. It's been uploaded more recently, and this is an article that's got really good views, downloads, and citations as well. So it's showing the value of also having an open copy on your institutional repository. It is a place that can also garner attention. And we do this because it's previewable. So when you normally land on an institutional repository, it might just be a kind of a metadata catalog. So a lot of words, a lot of links, a lot of text. What you're not really seeing is the content itself. And the whole point of making content openly available is to make the content openly available, as well as the metadata. So by doing this, having the PDF there to be viewed, we're hopefully encouraging people to engage with it without having to download it. And we're also making sure that the metadata that's there has come from Elements and is being well marked up for Google Scholar, Google Datasets, OpenAir, which is a EU harvesting system. Some of the other benefits for your university is that you get to keep a copy of your institution's outputs. We had some good chats at lunch as well about kind of copyright and licensing and how the transfer of knowledge and who owns the knowledge has changed over the last few years, and having an open access copy on your institution's repository means that whatever happens to your licensing agreement with a publisher, you'll always have a copy for yourselves and for your researchers, which is quite important. And as I mentioned, tracking metrics, views, downloads, alt metrics, citations, and that's something that Figshare does very well, seeing as we have integrations with alt metric and dimensions to get that article level information for you. I've stolen Kate's slide. She did this earlier in the year, and it's one of my favourite ones to talk through. It's talking about how mature your systems are at universities to support open research movements. So level 1, and this is just our opinion on one way you could classify how mature your system is. We're not grading anybody on their score on this. But if we look at systems, level 1 is publications, repositories with some core metadata, but you've got lots of separate databases, tracking the number of deposits to the repository, and you're supporting deposit pretty much just for publications and maybe giving some advice. Level 2, we're looking at publications and data repositories, being able to be integrated, that are still separate from the RIM system, so from an element system. You might be tracking publications and data deposits, as well as OA publishing and curated data reporting. And the support then extends also to data as well as publications. Level 3, we're looking at integrating those previously separate publications and data repositories into an element system. You might be monitoring now not just the number of deposits, but what percentage of those are deposited open access, either through a green OA route, so an author-deposited copy, or whether it's actually born OA, meaning it was published in an open access journal to start with. We might introduce grant data as well into the mix here, and then we hope to support some streamlined workflows for open access engagement to really convince people that it's a good thing to spend time doing. Level 4 is as high as we go at the moment, and that is a combined publications and data repository, so having one system that can do both, so researchers are more familiar with working with a reduced number of systems and not having to learn lots of different rules and systems and user interfaces. So if you can have publications and data in the same repository, plug it into the same RIMs, it really gives you the opportunity to proactively not just track percentage of works, but monitor and prompt people to deposit if they haven't yet deposited an open access copy. So that moves into the kind of compliance space. And I also had some chats already today about how we need to look at not just open access compliance for publications, but also for data, given the data mandates that are here now for the NIH and coming OSTP. So definitely be picking up with Kate when we have our roadmap sessions on Thursday, looking at next year. And the service and processes section for level 4 is really an embedded strategy and compliance frameworks for publications and data that you as the admins and your researchers at university are aware of. Great, so I chose to not live demo this because I have to log into lots of systems and I don't have single sign-on in my demo portal, but this is what will be happening if you use Elements and Figshare as an example of how to achieve open access compliance. So everything in the red box is happening in the Elements system, and we've got the Symplectic logo here on the left to show you that. So we're going to log in, probably through single sign-on. We're going to approve a harvested record, so we've already found that for you, given it to the researcher to say, is this yours? Yes. They do need to choose a file if it's not already open access to be able to deposit the open access copy. And they hit deposit. There's options in Elements for embargoes, so if they know that they have to embargo it for a certain amount of time to comply with a publisher policy, they can do that in Elements. But the main thing is where a university adds value is someone downwind of the element system who's working in Figshare can review everything they've done. So they can check on the embargo. There might not be one applied, and actually they might need one, so they can add one in before it goes live. If they make any changes to the existing embargo, the length of time, any changes made will be reflected back in Elements through to our bidirectional integration. And then whether it's just metadata or metadata and the files, those will both go live in Figshare. And that is it's so simple. I had 20 minutes in for this talk, and that's really the basis of the talk. So I've had to pad it out with other kind of conceptual and larger topics because it is that easy to do. It's even easier, as Kate reminded me, because you won't always have to approve a harvested record. Once you've said that this is my Web of Science ID, Scopus ID, Dimensions ID, we're going to just automatically harvest those articles for you. So you could even skip the approve harvested record bit, and that would be even faster. So I talked about open access, and I was intending to talk about just publications, but seeing as that definition I put in there at the beginning also talks about data, I thought I will also, I've got 5 minutes, that's brave, right, let's see. I will also talk about research data. So Figshare as a repository started as a data platform. We were built to just share research data 10 years ago, and we've evolved, thanks to our universities using it for more than just data, to expand to a full institutional repository. These slides are about 6 months old, so I had to probably rerun this data to see if we're still at 30%. But I've used Sherpa Juliet, which is an openly available source of funder policies to see who is requiring data archiving and or sharing. And actually, not very many governments worldwide are really mandating it. So most have no policy at all, 30% require, and we've got another 20 that encourage, or another 10 that don't mention, or other. So it's still only a very small proportion of the world's funders that are really kind of using a stick to mandate this. Yet we've seen quite a big adoption in data sharing in spite of that, actually, which I talk about here. So Figshare is an institutional repository platform. We also, not confusingly at all, have figshare.com, which is the platform that if you don't subscribe to us as an institutional repository, you can use as a researcher on a kind of freemium model. So you'll get a much smaller amount of data and one license type only and lots of other things like that. So you can share research through figshare.com, but it's a much more restricted way to do so. But looking at the data we have from this, we've seen the last 5 to 10 years that data has really been perceived as a research output in its own right. So it was just publications before, right? We were talking only ever about publications, citations of publications, and I think research data is really becoming the next non-traditional research output that's becoming a traditional research output, and policy and mandates are really driving this. Technical infrastructure has had to respond, so Figshare only existed because of the mandates that are coming out. And the approach to how you conduct research to include thinking about data has changed. Andrew mentioned earlier data management plans, DMPs for short. This is becoming something that researchers are having to think about before they even start applying for funding now. So what do repositories actually currently house? Again, I've taken this from the Sherpa set of information. So this is the number of repositories that have these items in them. So we've got over 4,000 repositories worldwide at an institution level that have journal articles in them. That's not unsurprising. But data sets is right down at 540. So there's only 540 institutional repositories that have a data set in them worldwide at the moment, which is quite low. I mean, that's if I'd have time-stamped this and did this 3 years ago, I think it would have been even lower. I think we're making progress. But we've still got quite a way to go for data to make its way up the ranks as a really kind of institutionally housed item. This is absolutely not to name and shame anybody, but I've been showing the same slide everywhere I go, so in fairness, I'm going to share it here too. This is the percentage of universities that have a data set in their IR. And again, this is about 6 months old, so I would imagine this has changed slightly. But the US is not keeping pace with the rest of the world in institutional repositories. Not to say that data is not being shared, but it's more likely being shared in discipline-specific repositories, which is probably best practice. You know, genomic data should live on GenBank. There's WormBank. There's lots of other mainstream data repositories that data should live on, and that's all fine. We've got lots of generous repositories as well, though, that if there's no discipline home for it, I think in the US we're still seeing a lot of people going to those kind of third-party sites like Figshare.com, but there are much more restrictions on size of data. There's less advice given on licensing, on ownership, on sensitive data sharing. If you're doing it with third parties, you're not getting that librarian's expertise and all of the value that is added there. And I would say that in all the other countries that we're looking at, especially like the UK has no data mandate. You do not have to share your research data in the UK, but universities have chosen to centre themselves in research data management as a new skill librarians can have, as a new skill the library and the university can add to its researchers. So I think that's really interesting. And there obviously still is a need for data to live in institutional repositories as well as discipline ones, because there is living in those in other countries. So this slide is slightly out of date, but I checked today and there are still questions like this being posed today. I didn't have time to update the slides, but this is all US-based tweets, which is very interesting, especially in the realm of post-Elon Twitter, and not a lot of, well, that's not true. A decent chunk of librarians and research admins have chosen to move off of Twitter, but your researchers haven't. So we're now having a bit of an interesting disconnect between where they're asking each other for support and where are the people that can help them. We're probably not even on the same platform anymore. But we had some questions from researchers. I've anonymized them to not, I mean, they're not problematic, but I thought it's not really fair to put their names on there. We've got things like, the more I learn about the NIH grant management, data management plans, with assumed, suddenly needed expensive and admin-heavy infrastructure to support it, not thought through at all by the NIH. It was very much thought through. It's just the systems aren't in place to support the mandates that have come out. Asking each other, how are people meeting these open access data repository requirements? Are there any favorite repositories? So if we move into kind of what they're looking for, what's a trust marker for a good repository if they have to use one? They like to see lists, verified lists, so the HEAL data steward and the NIH has got some best practice recommendations for repositories that meet their needs. So they need to see some kind of proof that the one they're going to choose is real, is well liked by the community, well liked by their funder. And again, who is best placed to provide this advice? Other people, other researchers on Twitter, or libraries, or research admin people in a university? And this is kind of privileged information, I suppose. These are questions that Figshare.com gets from researchers this month. So I'm going to start with the one on the right. I am the PI for an NIH proposal we are submitting by October 16th this year. As part of our plan, we need to have quotes for storage. Can you help us? And they're asking Figshare.com, which is a free website with a 20 gigabyte maximum limit. So no, we can't help them. But if their university had Figshare for a data repository, yes, we absolutely could. On the left-hand side, it's very similar things. We're trying to develop a data management and sharing plan for an NIH study. Can you help us with this? And this actually ties into exactly what Andrew was saying about the number one place they go to ask for data management help is the software provider. That's Figshare. We do help them. I personally read these questions and they don't fit into any of our support workflows because it's not a technical bug. So when it comes to support, they say, well, we can't answer this. So I respond to researchers still, which is probably not scalable. I can't help every researcher applying for an NIH grant. But if they were coming to a university, you'd be much more better placed to help them in their context and in their state. And bottom left one, as of right now, we have 14 studies that we will need to be published over the next year. Can you give us some more information on how we do this? So I'm assuming that's going to be a decent chunk of data that needs to be shared there too. And yes, I can help them, but should it be me personally that's helping them? Probably not. So how can Figshare help you to help them is what this slide probably should have said. Is your repository currently able to handle data? So this is a really nice slide that looks at some of the kind of this checklist I said about NIH and other UK RI in the UK having core characteristics you need to have a good repository. Does it have DOIs? Can it have curation workflows? Is there private links? Can you preview the files? Is there an open API? Do we have integrations with things like ORCID and GitHub so we can share code as well as data if we think data is a bigger sphere than just data sets itself? So having a review of where you're currently at will really help you work out if you're best placed to help your researchers if they suddenly all came to you tomorrow instead of coming to me. And repositories need to keep pace with the landscape. So Figshare is part of the NIH GREY initiative. This stands for the Generalist Repository Ecosystem Initiative, and it's a really cool project that the NIH is funding us and 5 other generalist repositories to make sure that we are keeping pace with the needs of data sharing in the US for the NIH. It's actually just good practices for all data sharing globally, but the NIH wanted to make sure that we were supporting their roadmap to asking researchers to share data. So we're 10 years in, actually that's 11 now, but we're still making sure that data stays a core part of what we do in an institutional repository landscape. So I've got 2 slides left, so I'm slightly over, sorry, so I'll get to move on. But this is the flip side of the diagram I showed you earlier. So if we look at depositing data, Elements is really fantastic at handling data that comes in, publication data, metadata, and can absolutely add a file and be pushed to Figshare. But Figshare was really born out of handling large data sets, different data sets. So you may want to choose to actually ask researchers to deposit the data in Figshare. I'll go on to talk a little bit more about why that is in a second, but it's the same kind of workflow. You log in through single sign-on, you'll choose your file, metadata. You can also set an embargo if you need to in Figshare. I've missed a lot of steps in a lot of these things. You can also do things like set restricted access. You can obviously choose a license. There's lots of things you can do. But for the sake of a short diagram, I thought I'd keep it simple. But once you've published in Figshare, you don't have to kind of key in any of that in Elements. We will just automatically harvest all of that back every day into Elements, and then that data record with its funding information can be attached to all the other information you have about that researcher in Elements, and start to look at that kind of open access, publication, open data, grant information, researcher themselves, and becomes really a good set of data to do compliance reporting on. So some of the reasons that you may want to recommend that researchers submit their data in Figshare rather than in Elements is that we already have kind of integrations with things like GitHub, GitLab, Binder, Bitbucket, Overleaf, Lab Folder. We found another one actually, I can't remember which one it is, but there's another Lab e-notes book they've set up an integration to deposit into Figshare that we didn't even know about through our open API. Obviously Elements is in here. So if you're really trying to get researchers to find an easy route to deposit, being able to also replicate metadata when they've already filled that in GitHub and just pop that in Figshare, that becomes really easy for them. Same as Elements, it also provides that same Sherpa Romeo in the user interface advice. And something that librarians often ask us about when we talk about Figshare as an institutional repository is preservation. So making sure that the data sets themselves and the metadata are well preserved. We have integrations with systems like Archivum to make sure true preservation is possible. Through our general policy, we'll keep data live for 10 years at least on Figshare anyway, but Archivum will allow proper preservation to occur. And I think that was quite an abrupt stop after speaking quite fast, but I think that's my last slide, yeah. I should have put a question slide, but that's it really. So the kind of take-homes are, it's really easy to deposit either in Elements or in Figshare for publications or data, and it should make it easy for your researchers to comply with the mandates that are coming out thick and fast, especially in the States. Cool. Any questions? Eerie silence. No. Okay. Oh, you got one. Okay.
And thanks. I'm curious whether y'all might be interested in having like an FAQ tab on Figshare.com about like this question, this issue you had about like researchers coming, hey, I need help with so and so funder thing, and like that's not what we do at Figshare.
Yeah.
Like to point them to appropriate, like maybe you should talk to somebody at your university's office of research or the libraries, or they can help you. And then also this issue you also mentioned about Figshare.com not at all being confusing with other Figshare for Institutions instances, which we've had that problem at our institution. People are like, yeah. I have trouble with depositing my data. Like, well, you put it in the other system, but they look the same.
Yeah.
So how do they not know the difference? Like, there might be maybe add a tab that has some of these things where you can just refer to people. Yeah, go here. It'll point you to the right direction.
Yeah, it's a really good point. So we've started to do that. So when they fill in, they've got a form now rather than an email address. So that's good. So we've already got some data about them, so we can help kind of triage. It used to just be email us, and we just have an inbox full of free text emails. So we've got a form now, which is good. And if they choose, I'm a researcher needing help submitting my data to Figshare.com, they'll get a response that says, to have help, go to our help site. Here's all the links. So we've literally only like 2 months ago though, so it's new. So I'm hoping that those requests will start to go down. What I don't think it does have though is necessarily some blurb around who to find in their institution. We say go to the Figshare help articles, but we don't necessarily have some text that says there's probably someone in our university that can help you go and find them. I'd be up for writing some text around that. We'd probably need to just have some wide enough text that job roles in different countries or states wouldn't be a problem. So yeah, but I mean, we'll chat about it and we'll write something up, but we can do that.
The challenge here, of course, is that some institutions Some institutions don't provide this level of support, so then
Yeah.
you're pointing them in a place that's not going to help them.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
more generally,
We
it's
may
probably
be able
useful.
to.
Maybe.
Yeah. Nice. Any other questions? No?
I'm curious if you've noticed any trends in terms of researcher awareness of what versions of manuscripts they're depositing, and it may be different in the UK compared with the United States, but just any thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's a really important one. I think the only reason that there is definitely more awareness in the UK is because they have to have it, because it's mandated. So if they want to get any funding at all from their university or from the government, they have to deposit a compliant version of the manuscript, which therefore means they have to know what version it is that they are submitting. And there's whole departments in UK universities of admins who are there to double check what versions have been submitted and prompt them and email them. So the OA Monitor, which Kate's going to talk about this afternoon. No,
any moment now.
Oh, right now, right after this. It's almost like we timed it properly. Yeah, she's going to talk about how you can use Elements to then track which version really has been submitted. But yeah, it's only when I think there's this is like a 7-year exercise that happens in the UK. So they have to do it and they have a lot of time to get used to it. And there's someone that's prompting them on every single deposit to make sure that they can actually submit it. So if they put the wrong version in, the university can't use it and then they get less funding. So yes, there's more awareness, but there's very good reasons why. I don't think we'd expect to see that level of awareness in somewhere that didn't have an exercise like that.
I think we're also seeing some of that shift, because where people would have perhaps traditionally offered the version that they submitted, of course, the field of preprint publishing has just exploded over the last 3 years. And so things that would have once been particular versions to make openly available are now their own thing. And so I think there's kind of more than one area where things are moving around.